If you do not provoke attacks of opportunity, you can do lethal or non-lethal damage. Your choice. Again, does not say with what you are attacking. The only mention is that in the improved unarmed strike, or rather the unarmed strike class feature of the monk and later the brawler and some archetypes, it says that a monk's attack may be with fist, elbows, knees, and feet. This means that a monk may make unarmed strikes with his hands full. This is the only place where it actually defines attacking with something other than your fists.
Right.
Attacking with your hands full. And I believe unarmed strike is actually listed as a one-handed weapon in the equipment chapter of the core rulebook and ultimate equipment. So that's just where I'm a little iffy about how you're interpreting it. I don't think anyone can use any part of their body.
First, I've got two counters to that.
Okay.
Second, I view this part here where it says a monk's and a brawler's thing as flavor text, because nowhere in the previous thing does it mention hands ever.
Okay.
Oh, and unarmed strike is also how you attack with bites and tails and similar things.
No, it's not. That's bite attack us.
Yes, when those
are
are
all
declared
called out as their own thing.
weapons, when they are declared as weapons and have weapon stats and have bite attack stats. But if you were to not have this pay the points to get the bite attack and you wanted to bite somebody, the rule is unarmed strike.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Like if I have a tail but not a tail attack and I want to hit somebody with my tail, it's an unarmed strike.
All right.
And I suck at it, and I'm going to fail. And I view this as... And secondly, I do believe this has been formed out.
It has been what? Sorry?
Unfortunately, I don't have the reference for this, but I do remember this also have been formed out. Like, does this also apply to the feat improved unarmed strike? And then the answer was yes.
Okay, because I was just reading it over on the PFSRD, and they include anytime official FAQ clarifies it, and in neither the monk, the unarmed strike, or improved unarmed strike, none of those make reference to an FAQ. So it may have just been discussed in a forum, but never officially added to the FAQ.
Mm-hmm. Now, if anybody of the listeners, especially our super, super ruly, crunchy, knowledgeable listeners, that some of you happen to also be co-hosts on other shows, can counter this, please, we would like to know. But in either case, whether or not the unarmed strike is a hand is irrelevant, because they can always just not be using that hand to hold that crossbow when they need to punch somebody.
Yeah, the only situation that I can really see it mattering is if your hands are like tied behind your back. Like if you just cannot use your hands, that's the only time it'll actually come up. Because otherwise, on and off, free actions all around. Mm-hmm. What is our next question, Param?
Next question comes from Will Hudson via Facebook. So, I know nothing of miniatures. Where should I find miniatures? Also, what are face cards and pawns? And can I use those instead? I'm tired of using my D12 to represent my character. I have not thought from this point of view in a very long time.
Yeah, I'm excited about this question because of that.
D&D miniatures have been so prolific for the life of 3X. It's hard to think of where we don't have those anymore. We have alternatives to that, but the concept of these super cheap pre-painted miniatures that came 12 in a freaking box, and then 8 in a box, and then 6 in a box, and then 4 in a box, and then 3 in a box. Wizards! It just has been so prolific with the industry that the fact that everybody doesn't have a giant collection and know instantly what these things are is foreign to me. But then again, pre-3rd edition, I didn't have miniatures either, and they were very hard to get and metal and expensive. So, what you use... I guess we should just do the easy one. Face cards are cards that just have portraits on them, and it's a discontinued product. Or not officially discontinued, but no plans to produce any more of those. And they are not really good substitutes for miniatures, though I've seen people do it when it becomes appropriate. But they're way too big for the medium-sized creatures they usually represent. Pawns, however, the Pathfinder pawn sets, are meant to be replacements or alternatives to miniatures. And what those things are little card stock punch-out. So it's about as thick as like your standard board game board, like a Monopoly board. And they go on the little plastic stands, and they're the appropriate size, and they're meant to be used on the battle grid with miniatures, and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, or actually not all sizes. They go up to huge.
Not all shapes. They're
They're
pretty
one
much
shape.
all that same.
But the monsters on them are painted as different shapes.
Yes.
And you can get them for both every bestiary so far has one, or will be getting one. I guess the Monster Codex one isn't out yet, but of course that will be coming out because they all do. And the NPC Codex also has a pawn set, and you can also get a bunch of pawns with the beginner box. And every single adventure path in recent memory has had a pawn set of also. So those are very good alternatives to replace miniatures for both the monsters and characters if you have like the NPC box or the beginner box. They have lots of player character miniatures that can be used there.
And there's one box that you're missing that also applies to that. There is the Inner Sea box, I believe it's called.
Oh yes, the Inner Sea box. Yes, the Inner Sea Codex box. Yes.
Let me just the Inner Sea Pawn box is the official name of that product.
Yes. And all that is, in my opinion, is the Pathfinder Society pawn box. Well, it's more, but it's mostly the Pathfinder Society pawn box, which is great because that makes Pathfinder Society easy. And who doesn't want Vikings in the desert? Okay, so great. They're a perfect alternative. They're $40 for a box, and a box has hundreds of minis in it, or of pawns in it. And it's probably the most economical way right now to use miniatures at your table, because at that price, it's even cheaper than printing out an equivalent number of them yourself, unless you have an economic printer.
So a couple of last points before we move on from pawns. If you get any of the boxes, the box has bases for medium, large, and huge, or whatever comes in that box. If you get any of the ones for the adventure paths assume that you at least have the bestiary box, and so it has most of the encounters that you will need a pawn for in the box, but it won't have any of the things that are in the bestiary box, and it will not have any of the bases. So if you were picking up the Adventure Path ones, make sure you at least pick up the Bestiary 1 box. But if you are brand new to Pathfinder, then I encourage you every couple of months, whatever your budget allows, to pick up another pawn box until you've got them all. And then I don't even know if you need to look at miniatures. Pawns are just so they're just so perfect for the role they play.
Yeah. I like miniatures, but that's a step up from pawns, and that's also a step up in price when you start doing that. But the pawn box, if you're just now getting into Pathfinder, get the bestiary box. That is probably the smartest purchase you can make as a GM, because it will give you 300 some miniatures for the most commonly used monsters in the game, and those monsters can also sub in for most other monsters if you don't have that particular pawn. So they can also be close enough miniatures for a lot of the core concepts of a fantasy game. I mean, just because they're fighting some weird demon that appears in the Wrath of the Righteous pawn set doesn't mean that you can't just put a standard medium-sized demon and say it's a demon. Go with it. And even if you're not playing Pathfinder, that box is super valuable, because if you're playing any fantasy game, it's the generic monster list that you're going to expect. You got your dragons, you got your giants, you got your oozes, you got your animals. You don't have your dinosaurs, James Jacobs. You don't have your dinosaurs. I want dinosaurs. But they need to make.
Do you not have any dinosaurs, or do you just not have the huge ones? Do you just not have the T-Rex? Is that the issue?
There's no dinosaurs at all in that box.
Really? I never noticed.
Yeah, no, I expected there, of course, to be dinosaurs in this box, so I went to go get the Ankylosaurus, and because my player character summoned an Ankylosaurus, and then the bad guy summoned an Ankylosaurus to fight it. And
nice.
We went full on kaiju moment. Let them fight, and it was fun. It was a great scene in our game, and that's sort of become iconic for our Wrath of the Righteous game, when our conjurer goes, and then I summoned the Ankylosaurus to fight them, and then they found out the other one is also a conjurer bad guy, and it was great, awesome. But besides dinosaurs, you got everything else. And if you need dinosaurs, we have kindly been informed from Mr. Jacobs that plastic dinosaurs are available for cheap just about everywhere.
They really are.
Yeah. I can't find an Ankylosaurus. I'm having a very hard time finding one. But, side note, that's ponds. They're great. Get them. Alternatives. Pre-painted plastic miniatures. That's going to be your next most common choice. If you the D&D miniatures are no longer produced, but they are prolific. A massive amount of them have been produced, and you can usually find, as long as you're not looking for a very particular one, because some of those were rare and collector's items, but as long as you're willing to just accept, any miniature will do, you can usually get those pretty cheap in bulk, as long as it's not the rare, hard to get ones. The dragons usually cost a lot, because the dragons were rares and highly sought after. But, wolves, bugbears, bandits, the standard stuff that you're going to want to stock a lot of, skeletons, those are pretty cheap. You're talking $3 to $5 a piece, and you can buy eBay lots of like whole bunches of them for very super cheap. But then that's going to be a lot more expensive to stock out a full collection than your pawn boxes. Now that I play in the game room and I don't have to travel a lot, that's most of what I use. But years of collecting miniatures, a case at a time, has led to a library shelf full of them. And that is a very nice thing to have, but it's kind of a very expensive proposition. And there's another way to get your pre-painted miniatures are still being produced. Pathfinder Battles miniatures are pre-painted miniatures produced by WizKids. Also applicable, Dungeons & Dragons miniatures have come back into production under WizKids. Mostly these are focused on 5th edition, but you know what? A dragon's a dragon. It looks, in fact, I hate to say it, the D&D dragons look better because they fly.
Are you talking about the attack wing line?
No, in the actual just generic Dungeons and Dragons miniature line that doesn't tie into Attack Wing, they have those, and the dragons are the same models they use in the Attack Wing in there, just without the Attack Wing cards and bases and stuff. So like you can get like the Blue Dragon, and now that set is a Blue Dragon floating with it's cool. They're great. I love them. They also put invisible miniatures in there, and that's cheating, but it's a cool idea. And then there's the next option is to go with unpainted miniatures.
You
want to stop?
You're not going to bring up Pathfinder Battles, the Pathfinder official pre-painted miniatures from WizKids? Okay.
I did.
Oh yeah, sorry, you did.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are multiple sets, and Eric Mona makes sure that they don't tread too much ground that Dungeons & Dragons miniatures has already tread. So you can find a lot of variety between the two lines. They're pretty compatible together.
Right.
Anyway, sorry, continue, Barry.
Right. And in general, if the most economic approach to those miniatures is to either buy the very specific ones you want, or buy bulk batches off eBay or other collections where you're less indiscriminate, but it's a whole bunch of them for cheap, or to buy whole cases at the time of the new stuff as it comes out. But either way, you're stocking hundreds of dollars investment to get a decent collection built that way.
There is Bones 3, I believe.
It's not
a
yet.
Secret that it's coming out soon. Yeah, but people know that Bones 3 is on the horizon. I hope I'm not revealing.
No, they put it on the Facebook.
Okay, good. So yes, Bones, they've done 1 and 2. They were both really successful. They're over $1 million, which is still fairly rare for Kickstarter. Bones 3 is going to continue that trend, and so I encourage you to look through that when it comes up, and just, I don't know how, completing your collection with unpainted plastic miniatures is only good if you either are okay with having a lot of white miniatures or are interested in the other side of that hobby, which is the miniature painting. If you are, Bones is absolutely the best way to go for unpainted miniatures. And Bones 3 Kickstarter is coming up soon, which you can get a lot of the big miniatures, and they've added a lot of a la carte buying to their Kickstarter, so you'll be able to get specific sets that you want for cheaper than when they are carded and sent to the stores.
Okay, so that's great. But Bones is the third option that I was going to mention. These are unpainted miniatures. Bones is definitely the cheapest way to go, especially if you can get it on the Kickstarter. But the bones themselves, after the Kickstarter, are still incredibly cheap. Like $1 a piece for most of them, like $1.25 for your standard player character, medium-sized mini, and like the most expensive ones are gigantic and kind of expensive, but then those would be hundreds of dollars in any other way. But these are plastics, unpainted, so you have to paint them yourself. There's a whole internet full of advice on how to get started painting. And that would be a whole different topic for a different banter segment that I would love to have because I love painting miniatures.
We can definitely have that topic. Yes. I'm interested in your insight.
Yes, I love painting, and I speed paint. That's my specialty. I do speed paints, good quality speed paints. Like I kind of want to start competing at Gen Con, and I might do that this year. And that's incredibly fun, but time consuming. And it can also become even more expensive than the pre-painted stuff if you go for the metals. Because not only can you get the plastics that are done with bones, but you can get metal miniatures. This used to be the only way you could get miniatures. But long before any of this, back when D&D was a chainmail, and back when most miniatures were used for Civil War reenactments and playing Little Wars written by freaking... who wrote Little Wars? I forget. Was it Lewis?
Little Wars? I'm not sure.
Little Wars, the very first written game.
You've caught me in a blind spot.
Oh gosh. Sorry. Was it Lewis? C.S. Lewis? No.
H.G. Wells.
H.G. Wells, Little Wars. Yes, thank you, Ryan, for Googling. Very first written war game, which is considered the grandfather of all role-playing games. Basically, it was the first time they decided to use these military training exercises and write it down because people were playing those for fun because they were fun. And Raul Partha is a classic one. John Bastille mentions in chat later. That name is still around, but the company isn't. But either way, Reaper is the king of both types of miniatures. It's the largest in the industry by far, in my opinion. But I might be wrong, but it seems that way.
I would be surprised if somebody was bigger than Reaper.
But there's Hassle Free. There's
Cool Mini or Not has a whole bunch of stuff.
Otherworld Designs. There's lot Mega Miniatures is still around in some form. There's lots of other miniature companies, but mostly they focus on like a specialty. And those are really great when you're looking for that one particular miniature. And often at my tables, the player characters are painted metals or plastics. Usually metals, because the metal has a better quality than the plastic, because they can get sharper details on the metals. So even if a miniature exists in plastic and metal at the same time as a Reaper, the metal has sharper details. So that's the one we go with for the player characters. So the player characters are metal miniatures that have been custom painted to look exactly like their character, and they've been cut and pieces glued on them, heavily modified. If you want to see something like that, Alex Agunas modded a miniature as part of the Craft Wondrous Item series of articles we have on the website, where he makes a kitsune out of a barbarian and paints it up, and it's a cool article. Go check that out on our website. And that's a great way to get just the miniature you want. And of course, there's been a new way to get exactly the miniature you want introduced, and that is Hero Forge.
That's how my group went, and all of our characters are Hero Forge this time around. And I wasn't going to bring this up unless it was topical, and it is. We're not super satisfied with our Hero Forge miniatures. There've been a lot of breakage. And just overall, I think we would have been happier if we found the Reaper miniatures that were a little bit more, like, it wouldn't have been so perfect to what we were thinking of. But I know Reaper quality. Hero Forge was a little bit more questionable. Hero Forge is more expensive, and it's more fragile.
Right.
So, unfortunately, I don't know how quickly I would recommend Hero Forge. I will say, though, that it's cool that they continue to expand and add options. You can now choose a half dragon and what they call a half demon, which basically looks like a tiefling. Oh, there's more. The Anthro Canine. That's new.
Yeah, that's new. You can go a fox or a wolf build with that one. They've got both options in there. And
Cool.
an anthrofeline is also an option in there too. So catgirl also an option. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about with Hero Forge, it is a new website that allows you to go on there and custom create a miniature using their program, and like you decide what pose it's in, what head it has. Like does that, like if you've ever played a video game and went through the character creation part where you make your character look just the way you want, it's that. But then what they do is they send it to a 3D printer and then send it to you. They use Shapeways to do the printing. They are fragile. Yeah, that's a true statement. Mm-hmm. I've had better experience with them. I've actually been very satisfied with them, but we treat them with like kid gloves, and they stay on the shelf and they get moved very gingerly, and that's how we treat them. But they are fragile, and they're not as sharp. There's a detail loss there because it's plastic, and then it's 3D printed plastic, so you lose some detail, and there's sort of a fuzzy effect on them once they get painted because they can't get that perfectly smooth. Because how 3D printed works is they melt plastic and shoot bubbles at a stationary target, either dropping it or shooting it from different angles depending on how the printer works. And then those bubbles stick together and form a 3D object, and that means that sometimes you can still see the bubbles, and which is the case with Hero Forge. So that's a great way to get exactly the miniature you want within a close approximation. It still needs some more variety. There's still not enough different sword, shield types, etc. So after you build 3 or 4 of them, they all start to look the same because they have the same equipment. But then again, it's more expensive. It's like, to get the painter quality mini, it's like $25 plus $5 shipping in the States, and I don't know what the shipping would be outside of the States.
A little bit more expensive.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about $30 to $40 for one miniature. So it's the one perfect miniature, but it breaks easy and it's $40, as opposed to a metal, which is close enough and still custom. I think the ultimate solution is to customize a metal, like to get comfortable clipping and melding and sculpting and gluing and swapping, but that's very work intensive and requires some talent. And I guess there's the ultimate option: pay $500 to a sculptor and they make your mini.
Sure. I mean, yes, that is definitely the ultimate option. Mm-hmm. But realistically speaking, you're probably better. You said converting a metal miniature, but I think a bones miniature would be easier to convert.
I have a harder time with the bones doing conversions.
Really?
Yeah, because the plastic warps too easily and damages way easier, and it doesn't cover up with green stuff as easy. So I usually have a lot better, when I'm doing mods, I have a lot more luck with the metals.
All right. Well, I'm on Hero Forge right now and almost turning my opinion around again, just because it is such a fun program to play with. Yeah, it's such a bummer that I'm not happy with the product.
And this is an emergent technology that has just shown up on the field. Mm-hmm. This will get better because 3D printing is still a brand new technology that is getting better. So as this gets better, then the value proposition of this changes. I like them, but I recognize that if they were dropped, they would break. And then you have to glue them and repaint them.
They were not dropped. This was just from general play with them.
Oh, really?
Well, okay, so one of them had a spike chain, and that was one of the most elaborate weapons you could have.
Oh.
And it's broken at the hilt. And then the bow. We have a rogue with a bow, Corey's character, and that one broke in two, too.
Oh.
So it seems like get a shield and a mace, you should be okay. But anything that's stretched a little bit further from the character, or from the miniature's main body, and you've got points of least resistance that you have to be more concerned about.
Oh, man, I've got one that's a rogue, and it's like jumping back with a rapier out and cape, and I'm thinking that's probably going to break then. Yeah, but they will break very easily. I have not had a break myself, but I've seen the horror stories and now heard from Ryan the more horror stories. How do they glue? I heard they also glued back together easy, though.
We haven't tried it because the spike chain is such an awkward break and just an awkward miniature that it's not even worth it.
Oh, okay. Well, that is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's just about every way. Oh, there's another way that's back to the pawns, is paper minis, where you print them out yourself.
Oh.
Those are real cheap in small batches, and you can find an almost infinite variety. Paizo sells paper miniatures for Pathfinder. Most of them are based on the adventure paths, and they're even more complete than the pawn sets. They're literally completely complete. Every single possible monster that would show up in the right quantities are in those. That's sort of their sales pitch. And they also have a really cool one that will solve my Ankylosaurus problem. They have the Summon Monster paper miniature set, which is every possible summon monster in both a fiendish and celestial form. But this is, you print them out on cardstock, you cut them out, you glue them together. It's a piece of paper. They look as good as a pawn. You can actually just use the pawn base. So just print it out, cut it neatly, put it on the pawn base. But you're doing the printing yourself. It costs ink. You have to have a printer. There's some work involved in cutting them out. I've gone that route with Rise of the Rune Lords when I needed very specific miniatures especially before I got the Rune Giants, because where else was I going to get one? Those are good, but those, so pick your poison. It's everyone's a compromise.
We've got one final question from David Jester Gibson via facebook.com/no-direction. He asks, when do attacks of opportunity recharge? He specifically asked at the start of the round, the start of a turn, end of a turn. And his example is if someone has greater trip, takes it as an attack of opportunity in the middle of their turn, which can happen if, say, I attack somebody, or I do something that provokes, which then they return with a combat maneuver that they're not proficient in, and therefore would provoke as well. So then I would also get an attack of opportunity on my own turn. So when in your turn do you get your attack of opportunity, or when does it recharge? And I read over the attack of opportunity rules, and it never says. So there is no official time in the turn that the attack of opportunity recharges. I believe I always play it as at the start of a character's turn. That's when their attacks of opportunity recharge. I definitely wouldn't say at the start of a round. That just feels like there would be ways to manipulate it.
At the end, the edge cases for manipulation actually don't pan out very well when you math that out.
Okay.
Because either way, as long as you're consistent and declare it in advance which way you're going.
Mm-hmm.
Because then the attacks of opportunity start, at the beginning of the round, assuming you've acted and can take attacks of opportunity. But in either cases, you wouldn't have been able to, because the rules are very specific on that. But assuming that it's a round you're allowed to act in, and you have already acted in the previous round, it doesn't actually matter when you took them, as long as the rule is consistent from your GM and declared in advance, because the math would work out the same no matter what. I personally play it your way. Your attack of opportunities recharge when your turn starts again. But I could see doing it at the start of the round just to make the math easier in your head to keep track of. Everybody's recharges at the start of the round. But whichever way you do it, declare it at the start of your campaign and run it that way.
It's never something that I've had to declare at the start of my campaign, but if it had it ever come up as like if a corner case ever came up, I think that we as a group would have just kind of decided then what makes the most sense for the whole campaign. Because like you said, it's hard to manipulate it in any way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The only time this becomes a manipulation and easy is when it is fuzzy and then it comes up. Because the one you want when it comes up and it's fuzzy is that it starts at the beginning of the round, because you would have taken the attack of opportunity at the end of before the round refreshed, and then you want to take another one. That isn't manipulation as long as everybody knew that going in, but it is a manipulation if it's fuzzy and then it comes up. And I have seen this exact conversation happen again and again at PFS tables, where you have different groups that play from different points of view when it comes up. Yeah. Especially for characters that focus on attacks of opportunity. Because, that's actually a very viable build. You get a freaking pole weapon, lunge, and go to town. Okay.
I appreciated that question because I really could not find an answer for it. And it's not like there's extensive rules for attacks of opportunity. There's options. But as far as the rules, there's one place to look for them, and the answer was not there. All right. I think we were ready to wrap things up right after this.
Wrap-ups and shoutouts. Wrap-ups and shoutouts. Wrap-ups. Wrap-ups and shoutouts.
And we're back.
Before we go, we just want to wrap things up by bringing attention to anything that our listeners might be happy to know about. Which, wow, this is not how I usually start the wrap-up section. Thank you for joining us for No Direction, episode 110, Nananananananana, BULMAHN. We also want to thank Jason Bullman for joining us. He was an excellent guest, as always. And before we go, we want to bring people's attention to some cool things, such as a couple of episodes ago, we did mention that Param and I, as part of Volunteers of the Year, were given the Battle Foam Pathfinder bag. And both of them have now arrived, and I think we were both ready to talk about them and what we think about them. So, Param, remind me, what is your past experience with Battle Foam?
I've never been able to buy one of their bags because they're very expensive bags. But several of my friends do. They're a miniature company that makes incredible bags for protecting miniatures, but they also come with a price tag. The key features of a Battle Foam bag in general for miniatures is that they have hard sides, though they have released a line of economy models recently that don't. And they also have a line of ridiculously industrial models that can be hit by a tank. But basically, if you're a Warhammer player or a War Machine player, you paint up these miniatures. Those are even more expensive than the ones we talked about before, where you're talking about a single figure costing $20, $30, and you probably put a mountain of work painting and customizing it, and you need to take it to a convention to play. You want a bag that is not going to give out. And so they have a reputation in the industry of being very good at that particular purpose. They also make custom cutouts for a lot of miniature lines. So like if you have a War Machine ship or mech, they actually make them that's the exact size of the mech, and it fits down into the foam and will be perfect. I don't use their bags, but I do buy their foam inserts for use in other bags that I have that are much cheaper for my War Machine army where I play that game.
I have used the Warhammer hard plastic one.
Oh, okay.
And that one has trays and trays of foam trays that don't have a lot of variance to them. I actually had to cut shapes out to fit my tanks and whatnot, which I was okay doing, but I can understand some people objecting to that. Mm-hmm. This is quite a different product, and it is quite a different price point. But I was talking to Mark Seifter about the design of it, and he said he, Mike Brock, and a third person, I forget who the third person was, it might have been Eric Mona, but they sat down with one of the most comparable Battle Foam products, and were just like, what else do we need as Pathfinder players? So they really broke it down. They were like, okay, we need space for pencils, we need space for dice, we need space for cards, we need space for a tablet. And if you go around it, you do see it. So on the back, you've got these three, they're fairly versatile pockets. You can fit decks of cards in there. You can fit a lot of dice. I don't know exactly what I would use them for, but they are probably the most versatile pockets on the whole thing. They're just a good size. This one is kind of the hidden pocket, and this is where you're supposed to put the tablet. So the one that's right under the Pathfinder logo. There's a nice little pocket there. It's fairly tight, which makes it good for an electronic device because you don't want it shifting around and you don't want anything else but that. And then in the front, you've got your, I'm not going to call it the main pocket. We'll just call it the front pocket, I guess. So here we've got an inside pocket, which again, if you want something that you don't want shifting around or interacting with other things, it's fairly sizable, and it has a nice thick layer here so that if there's something scratchy on this side, you know you can protect whatever's on this side. This one is technically for your dice or a deck of cards. 4 things for pencils or pens. But then the main pocket is where all the foam trays go. So the one that we were sent is fully loaded with foam. I really like the way it unzips and opens up. Oh, and there's a little thing for a name tag or a business card or whatever like I've got there. So it opens up, and you can see what we've got in here. They gave us a full deck. I believe there's 10 of them in all, of various sized foam trays that you can take the lid off, and then you've got a nice little half thing here, so you can fit exactly the number of miniatures in that you need, and then you can take out a couple of them, and you've got room for a book.
It looks like we actually got different loadouts on the foam from the looks of yours. Yeah, I have a lot of pluck foam in mine.
What does that mean?
One of the pluck foam is it's just a thick thing of solid foam, but then they've pre-cut squares in it so that you can reach in and pull it out. So you pull out the shape of the hole you want. So you basically you pick like if you have a big miniature, you pluck around, you put it down, and then you pluck around it so that it fits in snugly. I use that a lot again with War Machine. So like half of mine was pluck foam and half of mine was standard grid foam, like what I'm seeing in yours. And that's pretty standard. I went to my FLGS and got the model of the bag that this was based on and compared them side by side. And you know the main pocket, one of the changes they did is in the other one there was actually 3 ring binder clips at the bottom, which would have destroyed any book you put into it. But the reason that exists is that wargamers like to put like reference sheets for their games in that binder so that they're real easy to get to. So sorry for the interruption there.
No problem. So the one last thing I'm going to talk about, there was some confusion about what these things on the side were. At first I thought they were just more pencil holders, but then that's a whole lot of pencil holders, and it would be weird that they then put 4 more pencil holders. Apparently this is for accessories and add-ons. There will be other things that will clip into the side here, which now I do recognize because some of the people I play paintball with have vests that have holsters that you can just kind of hook onto the side there. So in case this thing isn't big enough for you, then you can add accessories eventually, or there's probably available now that will have specific types of pockets. You can customize it to get the exact pockets you need.
It also serves another purpose. This is the baby bag to the granddaddy bag in the line. Now, I don't think there's going to be a Pathfinder granddaddy bag, but Battle Foam makes that looks basically like a piece of luggage. Like it has wheels and a handle and stuff, and this smaller bag clips onto the top using those straps to the bigger bag to become one Uber bag.
I just saw the delayed video, and I never actually had them well framed in the camera, so hopefully right now people can see what I'm talking about. Yeah, there we go. The delay just caught up again. So, Param, this isn't really a review as much as just kind of showing off what we were given, but I'm curious. I'm curious to see how the next year, especially when Year of the Serpent starts, and I plan on starting a whole new thing of Pathfinder Society in Montreal again. I'm curious to see how often I use this. I don't think I'll be using this for convention trips unless it's somewhere I'm driving, just because it's bulkier than some of my luggage. I tend to travel pretty light, and I don't usually check any bags, so this would be something that I'd have to check. And I would be super nervous about anything happening to it, to the contents of the bag.
I don't think you have to check this. I think the particular reason this exists is that it's a carry-on size.
If that's true, then that is a nice bonus. And this would be lighter than my usual carry-on.
As opposed to the bigger one they sell. Again, like this is a specific customized Pathfinder bag that's different from the standard bag that this was based on. But I think that the standard bag that this was based on was sized specifically to be carry-onable.
So what I like is that anytime I think like, well, I don't usually use, like I don't bring too many books when I'm going someplace, I'll usually just use the PDFs, or if I know that nobody's going to call me on it, I might just use the PRD or the PFSRD just to lighten my load when I'm going somewhere else. Yeah. And so I know you can take out trays to make room for books, but as long as I've got a tablet or a laptop in there, I don't really need that space. But then I was thinking, but I could just put boxes of pawns at the bottom and then use the trays for specific pawns. Like I can take out the pawns that I know I'm going to need and just have the other pawns there just in case. And it's still going to be fairly reasonable and fairly compact. Or I can take the pre-painted plastic miniatures or specific miniatures, put those into the tray holes, and then leave the rest of the space for the pawns. Like, because it's customizable, because there's a lot of flexibility to it, anytime that I think I've run out of ways that I can run it, I tend to be able to come up with a new one shortly thereafter.
Okay. So I've put mine through paces because I was expecting we'd talk about this. And I've used it a few different ways now. Or tested it a few different ways. First, without taking anything out, I was able to use the side pockets to put in a core rulebook and a bestiary. And a thin notebook, and if that's all I was worried about was a core rulebook and a bestiary as minimum play material plus notes and adventure that I'm going to run as a convention game, I didn't have to take foam out. But I was using the tablet pocket for the books. Well, one book in the other pocket, one book in the other. So that part was fine. So if I was going to do a big miniature heavy load using the actual foam to hold minis, that's fine. And then I did the other extreme. I took out all the foam and I took my hardbacks and I loaded them up. Okay, this sounds like a bad idea. This was a bad idea. Not horrible. The top handle was giving. It did not want to do that because if you've never done that, that is an insane amount of weight to put all of that as book. Okay, but using the strap, it was fine. But it was incredibly heavy as doing that sounds like it is. I would not recommend it, but if you wanted to or desperately needed to, I think I was able to fit in every single hardback except the Inner Sea World Guide that has come out in there, and an extra core rulebook in there just fine. And that was without using either of the side pockets, so I guess I could have loaded in some more stuff in the side pockets to go even more extreme. Eventually, I settled on halfway as probably the optimal solution, where I took out one half of the rows and put them in the center of the bag, and on each side of them, so that it would balance out the weight, I stacked hardbacks, and that was fine. And I was able to put in all 4 bestiaries, Monster Codex, NPC Guide, Core Rulebook, and Advanced Class Guide in there just fine. So that's way more books than I would ever want to actually haul around. And then the center tray for miniatures, and that wasn't so much that it was overloading it, and still the pockets were unused. So there were a few different ways, and of course you were talking about take out 2 trays and just lay the book vertical. That worked fine too if you were just doing 1 or 2 books that way. So yeah, I put it through its paces. It will hold up. It is durable. I'm still not sure if it was better than my caboodle option, but then again that became too extreme. And then either way, it's a good bag if this is the one you like.
Yeah, right now when I'm going to a local store, I will have a big blue IKEA bag with a whole bunch of loose boxes and books and whatnot in it, and I never liked that, but because it's just a trip from the parking lot to the door, I was okay with it. But this, if I can get everything that I would normally put in the IKEA bag into here in a much more organized and easier to carry and more fashionable, frankly, option, then I will be extremely happy with my new bag.
Yep. The only thing I would do different with this thing is it needs wheels, but thankfully wheels can be purchased. Office Depot sells a little folding set of wheels that mainly meant for IT personnel. So it's like it's a set of wheels that makes a dolly that unfolds, and this will strap in that just fine. So that's a $20 purchase to add wheels to it, which is probably what I'll do if I ever yank this around the conventions.
Any other thoughts about the Battle Foam? I believe it's just called the Pathfinder bag. I don't know if it has another.
I don't know that this thing's not even available yet for real purchase yet. So we don't even know what the final price tag is of this thing to give.
No, but I believe it's in the $125 to $150 range.
Yeah, that sounds the bag this is based off of. That's what it costs. So yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's cool. Thank you, Pazzo, for sending it to us. Thank you again for, of course, the award that came along with it. We appreciate the award more, obviously. So it's a cool thing. Anyway, main reason we're putting so much attention on this isn't because they sent it. It's because we were baffled when it was announced, and now we have the chance to answer that bafflement with huh, that's a weird thing. And now we know exactly what the weird thing is.
One other thing I wanted to bring attention to, not nearly the same amount of attention, but Pathfinder Origins is an ongoing Pathfinder comic that's been going on right now. Mm-hmm. It's written by, it's a rotating cast. It's been Eric Mona, Wes Schneider, and James Sutter. So all Paizo staffers have been contributing short stories. Each one features one of the iconics from the main line and a guest iconic, all from the core rulebook. This is Wes Schneider's second book. It's issue number 5. It features Harsk and guest stars Leany. And hands down, it's my favorite one from the line so far.
Oh, okay. I haven't read one yet.
I was surprised So Harsk was given a distinct cadence, which I appreciated. It's a little more cowboy than I would have expected from Harsk, but at least it's really fun to read, and I can clearly see him, the dialogue really comes out of that character's mouth really well. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the dialogue, there are so many nice little snipes and insults in this particular issue. It really adds context to the world. I have mixed feelings about one of them, where somebody calls Leany Moldy Locks, which is great because mold is green and she's a druid, so she might actually have mold growing in her hair. Mm-hmm. But that's a play on a real-world reference to Goldilocks that I don't think Goldilocks exists as a story or as a person in Galarian.
Exists.
All right, so maybe Baba Yaga has told the story of Goldilocks?
Well, no, I mean, Baba Yaga is also a story that exists from a different cultural view with about as much cachet. I mean, and most of Tian Sha is based off of similar stories that are based off the same amount of cachet, Monkey King, Journey to the West. So the fact that some of our mythology, when they heavily have been using fairy tales and mythology, so I don't view that as anachronistic.
This does address my one concern that Leany was already in the main comic, and that nobody mentioned knowing Leany from the past. So Mauricial, as soon as Harsk gets to the point, because all of these stories are framed by the Pathfinders are justifying their existence to Sheila Hydemark, basically. It's a pretty thin framing device, but at least they've been using it consistently. And when Harsk gets to the Leany part, it cuts back to them in Sheila Hardmark's office, and Mauricial says, wait, Leany, the gnome druid from the Mosswood Leany, with an asterisk saying that from Pathfinder Dark Waters Rising number 4. So yeah, they address the fact that Harsk did not bring up knowing this person that helped them out in the fight, dismiss it as quickly as possible. It's not a great reason why he didn't bring it up. It's clear that this is just a continuity error, but at least they're acknowledging that it's a continuity error and moving on. Mm-hmm. But what I like about this is that because we've already seen Leany in the main comic, the fact that she's not in this comic very much, but Shalelu from Rise of the Rune Lords is featured pretty prominently. I appreciate that because it means that there was still a surprise, and I got to see Shalelu, who's a character that I've been running for the last 6 months or so, however long I've been doing Rise of the Rune Lords, and is a major player in Part 3, which I'm running right now. I got to see her brought to life in this format. It was nice. It was a nice surprise. And Harsk is not a character that's complicated, and so it could have been very easy for this one to get dull or not to really feel like a Harsk story. But it's just booming with Harsk's personality, even though Harsk doesn't have a booming personality. I was impressed, and I'm very happy with this one. Pathfinder Origins number 5.
And finally, one thing we definitely want to shout out to is Gen Con is just over a month away, and we need help! At least a little bit. If you are going to Gen Con, and you're going to be Pathfinderly minded, and you might enjoy sitting into seminars, and you wouldn't mind carrying a tape recorder, and wouldn't mind making sure you give that tape recorder back. We need volunteers to help coordinate the Gen Con team. This is what helps make our con coverage possible. I will be doing my fair share, of course. Ryan has been held captive by some blind ferrets and will not be able to do much of the recording. So we definitely need some help hitting the seminars, especially the ones that I won't be able to hit myself. So if you're interested in helping us out in any way and you are going to Gen Con, please give us a ring. I don't care if it's one recording or a dozen. If you can help out at all, we would really appreciate it.
Until next time, I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.